So most men, they go through the first part of their lives without examining anything. It's not because they're stupid, but because nothing in their environment forces them to. They move from one influence to the next, just copying whatever keeps them socially protected, right? They learn to avoid discomfort instead of understanding themselves, and they repeat opinions that they didn't form. That it's not their original thought, and they follow patterns that they've never themselves even questioned. They chase distractions that just keep them occupied but not developed, and so they just kind of you know fall in line with the herd in that sense. And that was my reality from, I would say, childhood through my late 20s. um, because I wasn't thinking about who I was becoming. I wasn't thinking about long-term consequences. I mean, my focus was, it was on approval and constantly being entertained and not missing out on anything, and being emotionally comfortable. So I shaped myself around just whatever made me feel those things, made me feel entertained and approved and comfortable and also included. Um, I believe that was normal because everyone around me was doing the same thing, right? Monkey see, monkey do. Um, but underneath that, the surface of all that stuff, something was different about me. Something else was happening. Um, my distrust in authority was always real. I've had that since I was probably like since I was 5, since I got thrown into public school. But you know, watching the adults, my teachers, my parents, stuff I saw on TV. I never once believed politicians were saviors. Um, I never worshipped any politicians. I never believed that any institutions were benevolent. Um, the school system was my first institution. Never liked it. I never saw it in a good light. And I also never believed that voting changed anything meaningful. So I could really see the artificial nature of the world pretty early. Um, but knowing something is off doesn't mean that you know what to do with it, right? So I had fragments of truth, but none of the know-how or discipline required to use it at that point. So um, and the truth without discipline, it collapses into cynicism, and cynicism without direction collapses into apathy. And so that's where I stayed for years. Once I got to my teens and 20s and stuff. So um, I was very skeptical but unstructured. So aware something was wrong with the world, and that awareness, it did evolve over time, but just I was unable to build anything better in my own life. So through my teens and my 20s, I would say that music filled every quiet moment in my life, because the silence, it forced me it would force me to confront things that I wasn't ready to face, right? And the clothes that I wore, of course, were an expression of my personality, or what I believed I wanted my personality to be. So it was a projection of that. Um, Shout out to Hot Topic and PacSun. Uh, yeah, I was in those stores pretty frequently. Gosh, but yeah. So I guess, and also most of my humor existed really, I guess, to kind of keep people from looking too closely. I mean, I try to be funny. I don't know if it landed all the time, but I used to watch a lot of Friends, and so I kind of, when I was younger, I modeled my personality. I think it was mostly middle school. I try to bend my personality to be like Chandler Bing for some reason. I wanted to be the class clown of sorts, but yeah, that's just crazy. That's just the stuff that you see on TV. It does a lot to form who you become, for better or for worse. Usually the latter, but yeah, I mean, I would say that my friendships, they really just, I mean, revolved around distraction, not really any standards of any kind. Um, in any future that I imagined for myself, it came from fiction. Like I said, from TVs and movies. It wasn't actual planning. Um, because when I was really deep into music, I'd been drumming for a while, and I told myself that I wanted to be a drummer. I wanted that to be my career growing up, because I knew that the pro skater dream wasn't going to happen. I was great at Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but I mean, I was a decent skater growing up in my teens, but I just couldn't land all those crazy tricks that other people were doing. And so my plans changed a little bit there. So I guess there was a little bit of planning, directionless planning of sorts, but I with drums, I did have some genuine talent, but I didn't really have any discipline. I wanted the identity, but not the work. So I told myself, I wanted money, you know, but shy of I didn't have the discipline to really get to that level with drums, and with anything else, I didn't really pursue any marketable skills to produce significant amounts of money. And I didn't study anything that mattered. I just lived in daydreams, because daydreams are free and they're easy, and they're a nice cheap hit of dopamine, and they require nothing from you. And so, but yeah, I mean, I told myself that I wanted meaning, but all of my effort, it just went into maintaining an image, not building any substance. So, I mean, my issue wasn't intelligence or potential; it was structure and responsibility, and honesty with myself. So, yeah. But yeah, Schopenhauer, Arthur Schopenhauer, he described this exact stage of life pretty well, better than I could. He said, we will gradually become indifferent to what goes on in the minds of other people when we acquire knowledge of the superficial nature of their thoughts, the narrowness of their views, and the number of their errors. And whoever attaches a lot of value to their opinions, the opinions of others, pays them too much honor. And so, very apropos, he was 100% right on that. So, see, but back then, I didn't live that truth, as you could see. So, that's hence why it's apropos. I mean, at that time, I cared very deeply about how I was seen by other people, because I hadn't yet developed anything solid within myself. You know, Men only cling to the approval of strangers when they lack something, when they lack internal authority. And so Schopenhauer, he taught the world that you experience is shaped by your inner structure, which is the representation, but the force driving you through life is the will, which is your instinct to push towards survival and ego and desire. And so in my first life, my representation was immature, and my will was undisciplined. And so that particular combination makes a man reactive, directionless, like I said earlier, and just easily influenced, right? And so, I mean, that was my state in my first life until about 29 years old, and then my son was born. And so, and that was really a line in the sand for me at that point. It was a dividing line. The life I had been living was at that point no longer acceptable, right? Because now, responsibility, it demanded that I grow up immediately. And so, and that's the thing is about having a child, is it exposes every weakness that you've been avoiding, right? And all these blind spots, become more visible. So, I mean, you can't escape into distraction when someone relies on your stability, right? So everything in my life had to change, right? My priorities and my habits, financial decisions, discipline, tolerance for discomfort, dependence on validation, and my ability to think without noise. You know, I had to things had to flip. I had to learn how to function without distractions and really, you know, sit with myself, learn how to sit with myself and rebuild my identity from the ground up. You know, I had to learn how to make decisions that were based on what was right and necessary, not based on whether they made me look impressive or likable to other people. So, you know, it was this wasn't optional. It was required to be the father my son needed. And so, um, but I mean, here's a part that you know that here's a part of life that most men avoid. Right, waking up has a cost. People who people who were comfortable with the weaker version of me, they drifted out of my life for sure. And so illusions that I depended on stopped. They just stopped holding together, right? I mean, the identity that I had carried from adolescence and into my 20s, it collapsed under this real responsibility. And so the emotional habits that kept me very undisciplined had to be dismantled completely. So, I mean, this is precisely what Schopenhauer meant when he wrote, you know, that most suffering comes from resisting reality, right? So, in his book In the World as Will and Representation, he explains that most human pain, it comes from our refusal to see life as it is, and our attempt to escape the difficulty of accepting it. And so the second life is where that resistance ends, right? You confront reality without any buffers. And you're able to, there's no filters. You can see yourself accurately, you can recognize your patterns, and you stop believing you can negotiate with consequences. But that loss, it creates space. It creates space for for direction, finally, for self-governance, for the kind of thinking that you need to build a life on, finally. So you stop outsourcing your identity and chasing the approval of other people, and you stop living based on impulses, and you start living according to principles. So, but here's the thing: the second life is not about becoming the best version of yourself. Okay, the best version of yourself is just, I don't know, it's just a corporate slogan, really. I mean, the second life is about becoming a man whose actions match his responsibilities. Once that shift happens, life becomes, I would say, simpler. Not easier, but simpler. Because you know what needs to be done. You know what needs to be removed from your life. You know what kind of man that your child needs you to be, and what kind of man you can no longer afford to be. So, your life stops being about comfort and your image and being liked by other people. It becomes about telling the truth to other men who are still stuck in their first life, right? Because you want to save them, you do. But the way that you save them is by giving them the language for something that they've felt, but just haven't understood, so they can finally see clearly and do what needs to be done. Because if you can't see it, you can't fix it. And most men live with these things that they don't know how to name. They live with all this confusion and noise and distraction and this internal conflict, but It's just a storm with no form of clarity. And that is why I built dad mode and dark mode. I wasn't trying to inspire or motivate, but to describe the terrain accurately. I'm not here to be a doomer or a black pill person or a MGTOW person. I'm none of those labels. I just want to be able to say what I think is true. This is how I see the world. Just, because you need to be able to identify things if you want to do something about them. And so, but yeah, I mean, the second life doesn't offer comfort. It offers truth. And that's the thing, is truth is what men are starved for. People are starving for the truth. But yeah, there's no final stage or point that where you arrive, you stay. You're continually refining your judgment and your opinions and your beliefs, and hopefully you're continuing to strengthen your discipline and become someone who who whose presence, brings order, instead of any chaos. And you continue becoming the man that your son looks to when he wants to understand adulthood. So the first life is avoidance. The second life is accountability. And once you enter the second life, you see that your first life, you see your first life clearly for the first time, right? Hindsight's 2020, and I have said that, maybe I've said that, like it's like I felt like a failure in the past. But I mean, I guess I would say that, my first life wasn't a failure or wasted or anything like that. I mean, it was incomplete. It was preparation. It was the unformed version of me, I guess. So the second life is where the real weight begins, right? And so, consequences matter. People depend on you. Your presence means something. Your behavior shapes your child's understanding of adulthood. The stakes are higher. And yeah, I mean, like once you can see things clearly, you can, stop pretending that you don't. And then that first life, it ends permanently. Because now you know the truth, right? Your first life was a draft. It was the draft. It was the first draft. This is the actual life, the second life. And it's on you to live it. To live it with the seriousness that it demands.